Side 9, Xone of Contention, by Piers Anthony. Continuing on page 283. Her vision was returning around the glare blindness. She saw the road on the right and moved that way, recovering speed. She had been correct. She was back in control. Then she wondered, had that lightning bolt been intended to strike them and missed because she had gone too slowly? Or had it been meant to blind her so that she would have to stop or crash? Would there be another? Chlorine nerved herself and accelerated. She steered to one side and then the other. She wanted to become a more elusive target, just in case. She also squinted, hoping to avoid any further blindness. However, Dearth did not seem to be trying very hard to stop them, maybe because they were going away from home. When they eventually turned back south, it was bound to get worse. Nimby squeezed her hips. He was tuning back in. "You want to take over?" she asked over her shoulder, and put one hand back. He touched her hand. Yes. She was concerned how to change places again, as reversing her moves would be tricky. But he simply moved up, and she lifted to sit in his lap, his arms going around her to take over the handlebars. He had control now, and knew where he was going. He swerved, splashing through the puddle and onto a dirt trail that was now mud. The wheels slewed and skidded, but the machine remained upright. The trail was sloppy, but navigable. Chlorine couldn't have done it, but Nimby seemed unconcerned. Soon they went cross-country, zooming across a soggy field and up a wet slope. They intersected another road and followed it to a farmstead. Nimby slowed the machine and held his hand toward her. Chlorine touched it and received a mindful of information. As she assimilated this, Nimby guided the lemon to the farmhouse and stopped. Chlorine got off. Then Nimby rode on, so as not to make a stationary target for lightning. Chlorine knew what she had to do. She marched up to the farmhouse door and knocked. It opened after a moment, revealing a mature woman. "Girl, you're soaking," the woman exclaimed. "Come in and get dry." "Thank you, but I must go out again in a moment. I must talk to your husband." The woman led her to a warm stove. The radiating heat was wonderful. A mature man approached. "I'm Farmer Jones. What's a slip of a girl like you doing out alone in weather like this?" "I am Pia," Chlorine said. "My party is stalled on the road because of fallen wood. We need a pulley to haul it off. I would like to trade for yours." "I've got a spare block and tackle, but it's too heavy for you to handle." My husband, Etzel, is on the motorcycle. He can handle it. Our friends in the car are blocked. That's why we need it." "My college son, John, can load it for you." The farmer nodded at a younger man behind him. "Thank you. That will really help." She smiled at John, putting as much reward in it as she could muster in her bedraggled state. "What do you have in mind to trade?" A dragon. I mean a giant reptile. Bones, very old. On your land. We will show you where." "What do I want with snake bones?" the farmer demanded. "Dad, she's describing a fossil," John said. "Maybe a dinosaur." "Is that good? Why should I trade a good block and tackle for news about something I've already got on my land?" "Might be worth it, Dad. Dino fossils are valuable and hard to find. The bones could get washed away in the store before we ever saw them." The farmer pondered briefly. "Okay, you go look at them and tell me if it's worth it." My husband will show you where," Chlorine said. "But you'll have to ride with him on his motorcycle." "This grows interesting," John said, pulling on a raincoat. "I'll do it." "You can wait here and have some hot soup," the farmer's wife said. "Wonderful," Chlorine said blissfully. John went to the door. There was the sound of the motorcycle arriving, by no coincidence. Nimby's awareness made such timing feasible. "Oh," Chlorine said, "Etzel doesn't talk, but he understands. He'll show you." John nodded and stepped out into the weather. Chlorine settled down to a bowl of steamy soup. It was sheer rapture. The farmer's wife tried to offer Chlorine dry clothing, but she demurred. She would soon have to go out in the rain again. But she thanked them sincerely for the temporary warmth of the stove and the soup. Soon there was the sound of the returning motorcycle, and John entered. "It's true, Dad. It's a dinosaur for sure, and we'd have missed it. We'll need to shore it up to keep it from washing into the river. Thing could be worth thousands. We'll find out when this freak storm ends, and I can call my paleontology prof at college. But it sure as hell is something. Also, that's a lemon he's riding. Only good folk have those. Give them the tackle." And so Chlorine found herself back on the lemon, trying to keep the bulky block, tackle, and rope in place. They headed south. The storm abruptly intensified. Dirk obviously was tracking them, and had been biding his time until they tried to head south again. Nimby seemed unconcerned. He gunned the motor, following the road at high speed. Chlorine hardly dared look, for fear she would see disaster looming. She reminded herself that Nimby was not the mute dragon or man form he seemed, but the demon Xanth, one of the overwhelmingly powerful figures of the cosmos. The fact that he lacked most of his power here did not mean that his intellect was diminished. He knew what he was doing and where things were. He had surveyed the whole area during his time of introspection, and now had a virtual map of it in his mind. Now that he lacked most of his magic, she was able to see the power of his other qualities, such as his awareness and his learning ability. If she hadn't loved him already, she would have been falling in love with him now. She was nothing, owing everything to him, but he was such a superior creature. He turned his head to glance briefly back at her and winked. Oh, she had forgotten that he could read her thoughts. That was part of his awareness, especially when he was so close to her. But that reminded her that here in Mundania, she was neither her natural, homely, dull, unhappy self, nor her enhanced, lovely, smart, nice persona. She was an ordinary person in the body of a mundane woman. But she at least had the wit to know her limits, and to follow without question the guidance of the one whose limits were immeasurably beyond hers. She trusted Nimby, and wanted to share his fate, whatever it might be. He did not have to read her thoughts to know that. He made her seem like a princess in Xanth, while he made himself seem like nothing much. But the reality was vice versa. She never forgot. If her fate was to die in Mundania, she wanted to do it in Nimby's company. Lightning cracked ahead, and a small tree fired out sparks and toppled onto the road. Nimby hardly paused. He simply guided the cycle overland around the base of the tree and back onto the road. He had barely been slowed. Dirk must have been infuriated because the storm intensified. Thunder became continuous, and the darkness of the massive cloud formation was countered by the brightness of repeated lightning flashes. Chlorine thought of Fracto throwing a fit. Nimby was getting to Dirk, and that was good. More trees came down, crisscrossing the road so thickly that it was pointless to try to use it. Nimby didn't. He rode through the forest, winding between the standing trees and brush, slewing around puddles and rocks. In places, the foliage was so thick that it seemed impossible to penetrate, but somehow Nimby guided the lemon through it without even scraping. That map in his head made his course clear, however opaque it might seem to her. The tackle tried to dislodge. She felt it shift as they whipped around a turn. She reached back with one hand to take hold of it. Nimby was getting them where they needed to go. She had to see that they got there with their payload. Something odd happened. There was a funny quality to the air around them. Her long brown hair lifted of its own accord, spreading out around her head like a dark halo. The cycle suddenly braked, skidding across the forest floor. It spun around. Chlorine screamed, but they did not fall over. Instead they paused, then took off back the way they had come. Lightning cracked behind them. The burst of heat shoved them faster forward. Dirt had struck directly at them, but Nimby had anticipated it and maneuvered out of the way just in time. It seemed he could tell when and where lightning was about to strike. That halo of hair, that must have been a signal. In Mundania, things didn't just happen magically. They had to be prepared for. Those few seconds were enough to allow Nimby to get clear. The demon Earth was doing his worst, and they were escaping it. They did have a chance. She realized that she had been somewhat fatalistic about that. Now her hope was growing. They slid through ridges and channels, across fields and through more forest, and then arrived back where Doug and Kim were waiting with the car. They had used a tow rope to haul the branch clear with the car, so were ready to move. The block and tackle weren't necessary after all. Chlorine realized that though Nimby could sense what was around him, he could not see into the future. The tackle would have done the job if the car hadn't been able to. Nothing had happened to Doug and Kim in the interim. Even the rain had abated. It was Nimby Dearth was after, no one else, and Chlorine realized that Dearth might not even be aware of others. So Nimby had enabled them to clear the way just by being absent. They loaded the tackle into the car and resumed their journey south. This time the motorcycle led the way. The rain increased and the wind, but no trees came down. Dearth evidently realized that they now had the means to haul trees out of the way, for the tackle could multiply their pulling power several-fold. So the tackle finessed the trees. The mere threat of it stopped that ploy. But now it was afternoon, and they would not get home today unless they drove in the night. The storm was extremely dark ahead. Dearth was saving his worst for last. Nimby lifted one hand, signaling the car, then rode into a motel lot. He stopped and the car pulled up beside it. Nimby touched Chlorine's hand, imparting information. "You stay here for the night," Chlorine said, getting off the cycle and stretching her legs. "But we can drive a couple more hours before night," Doug protested, "and into the night to get home. We don't have to stop." "Nimby knows," Chlorine said. "Stop here, eat, sleep early. We'll need to resume in the wee hours." "Okay," he said dubiously. Chlorine turned back to the cycle, and it was starting to move. "Wait for me," she cried. But Nimby just waved and drove away. "I guess he means for you to stay with us," Kim said sympathetically. "I suppose so," Chlorine agreed, concealing her hurt. She knew Nimby was protecting her by giving her a chance to eat and sleep in peace while he distracted Dearth, but she hated being apart from him. They took a motel room and turned on the TV while taking turns showering and cleaning up and changing to dry clothing. Chlorine saw the ongoing news and was appalled. It showed scenes of devastation. A freak storm had laid waste the region, and the Chattahoochee Cheese River and its tributaries were flooding. One of the flooded rivers crossed their route south. The bridges were closed. "We're not going to get across that in the next 2 days," Doug said grimly. "Not with a car." "Nimby knew," Chlorine said, beginning to appreciate why he had halted their drive south. Kim emerged from the shower wrapped in a towel. She was a lanky girl, but self-assured. "Look at that," she exclaimed, as the TV picture showed a bridge getting washed away. "Where is this disaster?" "On our route south," Doug said, heading for the shower. "Freak storm, they say." "Freak storm, my eye," Kim said. "That's Dearth going after Nimby." "Yes," Chlorine agreed. "That tree across the road was just to delay us while the storm flooded the area between us and home. Nimby stopped it with the tackle, but too much time was lost. But Nimby has something in mind." "It's like a chess game," Kim said. "Ploy and counterploy. We're just pawns, not seeing the larger strategy until it's too late." "Nimby will find a way," Chlorine said bravely. Kim patted her hand. "I'm sure he will." But Chlorine knew fake optimism when she heard it. The rain was only moderate in this region. They went out to eat and got gasoline for the car and turned in at 8 at night. Chlorine had a bed to herself. She missed Nimby, but knew that if he returned here to be with her, the storm would intensify and the motel might well be struck by lightning and burned down. So Nimby was protecting them all. "It's an irony," Doug remarked from the other bed. "We companions are supposed to keep Nimby out of mischief in this unfamiliar land. Instead, he's keeping us out of mischief." "Nimby's very smart," Chlorine said, "and he's been studying conscience. Demons don't come with consciences. They're like machines or golems in that respect. But Nimby's trying to learn how to love, to dream, to have conscience. All the things the souled creatures do. So this is practice for him." "I'd say he's getting there," Kim said. Okay, we got the alarm set for 2 a.m. Let's sleep.
Shucks, Doug said. I thought we were in for 6 hours of hot love.
6 minutes, Swifty, Kim retorted. Then you're done, ready or not.
You're a hard task, mistress.
No, a soft one, for 5.5 minutes. After that, I turn into a brassy lassie. Now Chlorine really missed NIMBY. The Brassies were Xanth folk made of brass. Their women could be surprisingly soft when they wanted to be, but were otherwise metal hard. Kim was obliging Doug's interest, but had set a time limit well within a normal man's capability. She was a nice person. Chlorine knew that if she set NIMBY such a limit, he would manage to signal 5 storks in 5 minutes. That was an advantage of not being human. She closed her eyes, imagining NIMBY's performance, and thought she felt his answering nudge. Probably imagination, because of his lack of magic here. But maybe he was tuning in on her and shared her vision and feeling. She wished they could signal the stork and have it deliver, but of course that would never happen unless NIMBY wanted it. He had given her so much, she was ashamed even to think of wanting more. Of being a normal family, with all the joys and travails of raising children. The alarm went off, startling her awake. They scrambled out of their beds and lined up at the bathroom, getting ready. 10 minutes later they were outside, 2 in the car and 1 waiting for the motorcycle. It came. Chlorine got on behind NIMBY, and they were on their way somewhere. She wondered where he had been all night. Probably riding around in random patterns, never pausing, so that Dirth could not pin him down. Fortunately, NIMBY did not need sleep. When they lay together for the night and she slept, she knew that his awareness was reaching out, exploring all Xanth. But what about Etzel's mortal body? That must be getting tired. So where were they going now? Not south. NIMBY followed roads and trails to the side. Dirth was aware. It seemed he always knew where NIMBY was, once he tuned in, and the weather worsened. But it was apparent that a storm could not be generated instantly, and NIMBY, taking an unexpected direction, was staying just ahead of it. Still, this was not leading home. They drove some distance, and dawn came. Still NIMBY led them in the strange direction. They took a side trail. This soon became waterlogged. The flooding had reached this far, drowning out the road. Chlorine saw a bridge ahead that was above the water, but the approach was impossible. NIMBY turned off the motor and came to a stop. He touched Chlorine's hand. She got off and went to the car, which had stopped with its tires deep in standing water. The road goes through and crosses the river. Thereafter it's mostly high ground. If we cross here, Dirth won't be able to flood us out later. But it will stop your motor. Turn it off. We'll make a winch. It will be slow, but can be done. They didn't question this. They shut down the motor and brought out the block, tackle, and rope. NIMBY walked the lemon out to a stout tree, then anchored the block to it. It was a special design that could be set to increase the pulling force considerably. This required a lot of rope, but they had it. NIMBY had planned well. Then he tied one rope to the motorcycle and the other to the distant car. He rode the cycle along a dry ridge, and it hauled the car slowly through the water. Chlorine remembered that there had been an example of such a pulley in one of the movie previews they had seen on the second day in Mundania. NIMBY had studied that and learned. There had been motorcycles, too, she realized. Now he was using what he had learned then. Nothing passed him by. Then NIMBY disconnected and walked the lemon to another tree farther along. He repeated the process. After several such stages, the car was through the deep puddle and back on dry land at the edge of the bridge. It had been towed through the water without having to struggle to keep its motor dry. Apparently water didn't hurt a motor that wasn't running, at least not in the same way as it had in the mountains, unless it was guided in the night by the malign power of the demon Earth. They let the motors dry briefly. Then they started them without difficulty and rode across the bridge. The water was rushing tumultuously under, but the bridge supports and structure were solid. Evidently this was a little-known crossing that Dirth had not thought to wash out. Now it was too late. Was Dirth angry? So it seemed. This time clouds did not form and thicken. The opposite was the case. The terrain warmed and dried. Steam rose from the scene, then smoke. Then fires broke out. Smoke rose into the sky. What was happening? Nimby touched her hand. Volcanic activity? She asked, amazed. Are there volcanoes here? Not hitherto, but Dirth was angry, and the power of the earth was his as well as the powers of the air and water. This region would see its first volcano if Nimby didn't get away from here soon. But Nimby was already moving away from it. Their two vehicles raced past the spreading fires and left them behind. The volcano, too, was too late. Dirth had not had time to raise it to sufficient power, thanks to Nimby's sudden change of direction. Even so, there would be new weather headlines for the local newspapers. Chlorine wondered again where Nimby had been during the night, but obviously it had not been near here. So he had surprised Dirth and gotten through another barrier. Nimby signaled the car again. They pulled over to the side of the road. Nimby touched Chlorine's hand. Nimby needs time to be aware, Chlorine announced. We have caught up to his prior plan, and now he needs more information. But we can't afford to pause. Dirth will strike. We have an hour of clear road ahead. Nimby must ride in the car, and Doug can ride the lemon. Got it, Doug said. It's been like magic getting through. We want more of that. He took over the motorcycle. Nimby got into the back of the car with Chlorine. Kim drove. As they moved out, Nimby leaned back and closed his eyes. Chlorine thought he was sleeping, but he took her hand. Suddenly she was sharing his awareness. She saw the land of Mundania extending as her perception rose from the car, like a bird flying upward. The trees, houses, roads, lakes, and fields spread out in the manner of an unfolding map. There were tiny cars on the roads, moving in various directions. She realized with a start that this was not a picture. This was reality. This was what was happening in this region of Mundania right now. There was another river, also flooding, with its bridges closed. They had circled around one such impediment, but now were heading into another. Well, they had almost 2 days to get home, and if it took 1 day to get around this one, they would still be in time. The scene flew south, to the peninsula of Xanth called Florida in Mundania. It dropped down to another swollen river, crossed it, and oriented on a town beyond. On a motel. Into that motel, searching out a particular unit. Into that unit. There was a figure Chlorine recognized. Sean Baldwin Mundane. With a young woman who looked somewhat familiar. Oh, it was Willow Elf, without her wings. Her mundane version. And Sean's little brother, David Baldwin, now age 15. And his cat, Midrange. They had visited Xanth 3 years ago. Chlorine knew them well, for she and Nimby had been with them when ill wind came to Xanth. Willow carried a locket. Chlorine recognized it from Nimby's awareness. It was magic, holding any amount of anything, and at the moment it held a few oddments, a lesser demon, and a bucket of magic dust. Magic dust! She had for the moment forgotten. That was what Nimby needed to have some power of magic in Mundania. His body in Xanth was the source of all magic, but here he was mundane, until he got that dust. Sean and Willow were bringing it to him, but had been stalled by the flooded rivers. They could not get across. Did Dirth know this? So far he had given evidence of watching only Nimby, but he surely could watch anyone he chose, here in his dreary land. So he was not only blocking Nimby's progress with imperfect success, but blocking Sean's progress with better success. Because Sean did not have awareness. He could not fathom the devious ways to circumvent the barriers. That river would take days to subside. How could Sean and Willow get through? They had Sean's car, but the bridges were closed. The bridges were in place, but deemed to be unsafe during the flood. No one was allowed on them. Maybe someone could sneak across by foot, but then he would be without his car. What could they do? Willow perked up, cocking her head. She heard something or sensed it. She touched Sean's arm and whispered something to him. She had felt Nimby's awareness. Chlorine knew this only because Nimby did. Contact had been made. Willow was of Xanthly origin, so was better attuned to magic, even this very slight magic of sensing. But what good was it? No one could cross that river from either side, not until the 3 days of the challenge were long since over. Nimby had gone around one block, but used up a night doing it, and the block at the other end he could not do much about. So the essential nature of this contest suggested that Nimby would lose. Did it mean that Sean's party would give up its effort to bring the magic locket to Nimby? Then the scene faded. The vision was done. Chlorine opened her eyes. Nimby did not. He had gone to sleep. Or at least his body had, and that was surely good. Chlorine told Kim what she had seen. So the mundane Baldwins are trying, she concluded, but they can't reach us, and we can't reach them. Even if one party managed to cross its river, the other river is keeping the other back. We are kept apart by parallel rivers. So it looks as though Dearth has won. Is Nimby concerned? Kim asked. I don't know. He's asleep. No need to clarify that it was really Etzel's tired body sleeping. He probably got no rest last night. So what do we do? Chlorine asked, near tears. We move on south. Maybe we'll get a break. A break? Like finding a boat to cross the river. Dearth would sink it. Kim shrugged. It's not over till it's over. They continued south. When they reached the city, there was no way to go south beyond it. Nimby woke. We have gone as far south as we can go, Chlorine said. He touched her hand, then returned to sleep. Turn left, she told Kim. There is a motel there with a room free. The motels were crowded now because of the number of people caught unexpectedly away from home. Finding a room for the night would be difficult. Kim turned, and Doug on the motorcycle followed. They drove along the side road. There, Chlorine said, pointing. But it says no vacancies, Kim protested. Try it anyway. They drove to the front office. Kim got out and went in. She emerged moments later with a look of vague awe. They thought they had no vacancies, but then they got a cancellation, so we got it. Nimby knew, Chlorine said. How could he know the future? I mean, you explained about the awareness, but that's all in the present, isn't it? I think he knew the people were canceling in the present. They just hadn't yet notified the office. So they had a good room. This time Nimby joined them. The storm hovered, but did not intensify. Dearth seemed satisfied to keep the two rivers flooded, knowing that they represented a formidable barrier. He knew where Nimby was, and where Sean's party was. As long as they remained separated, victory was just a matter of time. Nimby went to bed and slept. We'll go get pizza, Doug said. Chlorine sat beside the bed and watched Nimby. Surely his body was tired and needed the rest. But he didn't even seem to be worried. Was he bluffing? But with the two parties unable to meet, he had to lose. Should he at least be trying to get across the river, on the chance that Sean would get across his river? Whatever the end of this, I love you, she murmured. You are my everything, Nimby. For at least she had had 3 years of the wonder of him. And perhaps she would have more, if all Nimby lost was status. She didn't want him to be hurt, but she hardly cared about his status, as long as she could be with him. But she was afraid that if he lost that status, he would leave Xanth, and that would be the end of everything. Doug and Kim returned with the pizza. They turned on the TV and watched the weather news. It wasn't good. They chatted about incidentals, staying away from the obvious subject. Nimby slept on. Finally, Chlorine joined him, lying beside him, holding his hand. He was unresponsive. Was that just because his body was dead tired, or was it worse? Could Nimby have given up? In the morning, Nimby joined them at a restaurant across the street for breakfast. Finally, Doug broached the awful matter. 2 days are gone. What do we do? Nimby touched Chlorine's hand. We relax, she said. We read a book. Read a book? Kim asked. It was evident that her patience was fraying. I saw a little library just down the street from us, Doug said. We could go there. Kim glanced at him, but refrained from making a sharp comment. Well, it will pass the time, I suppose. As if they had too much time on their hands. Chlorine shared their gathering depression. Were they just supposed to dawdle here, waiting for the end? They finished breakfast and went to the library, but as they entered, the lights went out. Oh, another power failure, the librarian said. I'm so sorry. Her name tag said Mary Lou Matthew. Kim looked around. You have a computer system. Yes, for the patrons to use to go in line, the librarian said. They love it, but the power's been so erratic the last 2 days we can't use it. They knew why the power failed. NIMBY could escape the moment he reached the ozone, if he had access to the grid at the right time. The formal check-in time was in the next half hour, but Dirth would make sure the power didn't return until well after that, or when NIMBY left the library. Things were quiet now only because Dirth was in control of the situation, but Dirth wasn't taking any chances. They looked at books, as it was light enough without electric lights. NIMBY took one about quantum physics and read it avidly. Chlorine remembered that Doug had discussed the matter. NIMBY tended to follow up on anything that attracted his interest, so now he was completing his knowledge of that subject. Chlorine preferred to look at a book of pretty pictures. Then NIMBY touched her hand. Mystified by his request, she got up and went to the library's bathroom. It had a window to the back. She loosened the latch and opened it. Here, she said out the window. Something leaped up, landing on the sill. Startled, she drew back. It was a nondescript cat. Then she recognized it. Mid-range, she said. What are you doing here? She picked him up. NIMBY had known he was coming. She carried the cat into the main section of the library and set him down beside NIMBY. NIMBY reached out to Mid-range's collar. There was a chain with a locket. NIMBY took the locket in his hand, without removing it from the cat. He touched Chlorine's hand, and she felt a thrill of power. It was the magic dust within the locket. NIMBY was drawing on it without even having to open the locket. Something in her body changed. In fact, she felt 3 pulses of change. Chlorine stared. So did Doug and Kim. Is that what I think it is? Kim asked. There was a sudden roll of thunder outside. Dirth had just caught on. NIMBY got up, briefly touched the hands of Doug and Kim, and went to the computer terminal, carrying Mid-range, who seemed more than satisfied. Chlorine knew how that was. He touched the unit. It came on. Lightning struck the building. But the library evidently had an arrestor because there was no damage. Dirth had been caught by surprise and couldn't act swiftly enough. Kim caught on. She leaped to the terminal and started typing. The screen came on. But there's no power, the librarian protested. Now there is, Doug said. And indeed there was, for NIMBY was powering the system magically. None of them saw fit to mention that detail, however. Chlorine sat at the adjacent terminal, joining in. This one was also working, as the current flowed throughout the system. Doug came to type for her. Kim led them straight to the ozone. They entered it, and the hall became real around them. Edsel and Pia were there in Brianna's leaf. So were Brianna and Justin. We were afraid you wouldn't make it, Pia said, coming to hug Chlorine. Chlorine had had a similar fear, but didn't care to admit it. NIMBY knew. For sure, Brianna said. We sent the locket out, but heard there was really bad weather in Mundania. We figured we knew why. When the Baldwins reported trouble getting through, we were really nervous. Mid-range cat got through with the locket, Chlorine said. I think the magic leaked out and affected him, giving him extra intelligence. He knew where to go. Suddenly she realized why NIMBY had been sleeping so much. His awareness had been following the cat, guiding Mid-range throughout. The demon Earth was watching the humans, not the cat, so he slipped through. She glanced at Kim. You'll have to see that Mid-range gets back to his family with our gratitude. We will, Kim said. Nimby touched hands with Etzel, and Chlorine touched Pia. Her orientation changed. Now she was looking the opposite way. Nimby touched Chlorine's hand. Suddenly she had important new information. She turned to Pia. I have some news for you. Nimby is pleased with the way you and Ed cooperated and has given you 3 gifts. Oh, we don't need any gifts, Pia protested. Being in Xanth was such a wonderful experience for us. She glanced at Etzel. We're going to stay married and have children, and I'm going to study the environment. I have gained so much. Then I hope you are pleased with the gifts, for they have already been given, Chlorine said. First, your body has been restored to its form at age 16, as it seems was your wish in Xanth, and will be easier to maintain that way. Oh, Pia exclaimed. I thought that was only during the adventure. It was a foolish wish anyway. It's really meant for Etzel, Chlorine said. I like it, Etzel agreed. Second, your diabetes is gone. Pia's mouth dropped open. No more needles? I thought that was only in Xanth too, the healing spring. No more needles. Third, you will receive a visit from the stork. Pia was astonished. You mean, even though we were in Xanth, with your bodies? Perhaps, Chlorine said. We used your bodies similarly. Because of your association with Xanth at the time, your child will have a magic talent when visiting Xanth. Pia seemed about to faint. That really gave her something to think about, Kim said, smiling. I envy her. Kim's smile, though genuinely warm for her friend's good fortune, had a tinge of sadness she tried to mask. You too will receive a visit, Chlorine told her, with similar magic. But that can't be. Kim hesitated, unaware that they knew about her problem in that respect and her secret heartache. We were in Mundania the whole time. The storks deliver as Nimby tells them to. The 2 of you were extremely helpful and are deserving. Now Kim was the one about to faint. You mean I really will have a baby? Her underlying sadness was transforming to abiding joy, and it was mirrored in Doug's face. As will I, Chlorine said. Then startled, she looked at Nimby. I will? Everyone laughed. Then the 3 women came together and hugged each other. This is wonderful but weird, Brianna said, looking on somewhat enviously. Nimby touched her hand. But my turn will come, Brianna added, awed, and be worth waiting for. Behind her, Justin's eyes widened in surprised surmise. But after a moment of thought, Pia got serious. I don't want to seem ungrateful, but I don't think I want these gifts. Kim winced. Pia, this isn't exactly something you can turn down. Nimby is... I know who Nimby is, Pia faced him. I appreciate all this, Nimby. I really do. But they are selfish things. I've been selfish all my life, but in Xanth I discovered that I don't like that style. I want to do something useful with my life. So with all due respect, take back your gifts. I do want to be beautiful and free of illness, and now I do want to make a family. But I would trade them all for the ability to accomplish my new purpose, which I think is to save the great old trees of Mundania, just as I helped save them in Xanth. And I guess that's something I'll just have to do by myself. I think I can do it all, the hard way. Nimby looked at Etzel. No argument here, Etzel said. All I wanted was Pia back, and I think I like her even better this way. Nimby extended his hand to Pia. She stepped forward and took it. Nothing showed, but Chlorine knew that there was a pulse of magic. They were all in magic, all the way out to the library terminals that Nimby's magic was animating. Then Pia stepped back. Nimby touched Chlorine's hand. You now have additional intelligence, courage, and persuasiveness, Chlorine told Pia. These qualities will help you accomplish your purpose. Pia smiled with genuine gratitude. Thank you so much, Nimby. These gifts I will use well. I will always treasure my time in Xanth, but my true mission is in Mundania. Nimby turned away. The job was done. The others bade each other quick farewells. Then the 4 Mundanians departed, and Nimby and Chlorine went back toward Xanth, leaving Justin and Brianna in the leaf. Wait till Pia discovers that those last gifts weren't in exchange for the first ones, but in addition, Chlorine murmured. And wait till Etzel discovers your influence on his lemon motorcycle, when mid-range hides the magic locket in it. Nimby didn't reply, but he smiled. He was learning about niceness, too. Author's note. No, it's not true that a woman in a southern state accidentally got her skirt torn so that her panties were exposed and left a trail of 17 freaked-out men. That doesn't happen in Mundania, where there is no magic. Anyway, she was riding on the back of a lemon motorcycle at the time, so hardly anything showed. In any event, this novel is fiction, and no, that lemon is not for sale. Some of my readers do seem to have difficulty distinguishing fantasy from reality. It's that trace of magic dust that wafts out from between the pages when they first open a Xanth novel. Nothing to be much concerned about. It gradually wears off, in the course of years. When they lose the last of their imagination, they are ready to be adults in Mundania. This novel is special for a reason having nothing to do with its merit. With this title, I now have published 1 or more books beginning with each letter of the alphabet, from Alien Plot to Zombie Lover. They aren't all Xanths. They scatter across fantasy, science fiction, martial arts, autobiography, and history. But it was Xanth that wrapped it up, as I tackled the more difficult letters, X, Y, and Z. No, I don't plan to go through the alphabet again. Once was enough. But I regard it as one of the nicer, meaningless accomplishments. Readers often inquire where I get all my ideas. In the case of Xanth, that's easy to answer. Most come from my readers. They are constantly sending notions, ranging from simple puns to full novels, and I dutifully note them and see where and how I can use them. I had more than 200 reader notions piled up when I started this novel. I used more than 150, but didn't come close to catching up, because more were piling in while I wrote the novel. It's like trying to bail out a leaky boat. Some just don't fit in with the current story. Some I used this time go back several years. Many I use, but am unable to do full justice to. A number have had to wait until I can give them proper play, such as having a particular character have an adventure. So to those of you who hoped to see your notions here and do not see them, I'm sorry, and maybe next time. As of this novel, I have caught up with the feasible notions through the year 1996, and about half those for 1997. Readers also inquire where I get my names. The answer is easy. I collect books of names. In 1965, before we had our first surviving child, we lost 3 stillborn in the first decade of our marriage. Life can be drear in Mundania. I got the twin, no pun, booklets. 3,000 names for boys and 3,000 names for girls, which are very good. I deducted them as a business expense, the whole 50 cents, because they were indeed for business, naming my characters. For example, that's where I found Colleen, a depressive girl in the Mode series. It's a variant of Colleen, Irish for girl. But I like the spelling better, because Colleen is no ordinary girl. Later, when we did have children of our own, we got names for boys and girls free from the hospital. We also bought Let's Name the Baby, and all of these served well for characters. In 1991, Lori Tomlinson sent me the Baby Name Personality Survey, which describes the popular impression of first names, which seem to derive mostly from celebrities who cast the shadows of their personalities across their names. For example, Linus resembles the kid in the comic strip Peanuts, or will be a scholar like Linus Pauling. That sort of perspective is ideal for my purposes. Then, in 1996, I got A Dictionary of First Names, published by the Oxford University Press, which is naturally the most authoritative. Yes, of course I'm prejudiced. I was born, delivered, in Oxford, England, 7 weeks before another genre writer, the late John Brunner. Yes, I knew him. He was very good, his most notable novel being Stand on Zanzibar. Anyway, that dictionary has 443 pages of names. Yes, my name is in it. It's a variation of Peter, meaning rock. It says the modest popularity of the name Piers may derive from Langland's medieval poem, Piers Plowman, and symbolizes the virtues of hard work, honesty, and fairness. I can live with that, though I was actually named after a character in the Xone series of novels my mother was reading at the time. No, I never read any of them myself, but it does seem fitting that fiction gave me my name. There may, after all, be a trace of magic in Mundania. But the point is, where did I get names like Etzel and Pia? And I have to say, not from these books. Oh, they are there, in some of them, but my inspiration was elsewhere. I go to the name books only when I haven't thought up something better on my own. Back when I wrote Demons Don't Dream, I needed a couple of humorously incidental names to flesh out Doug Mundane's background, his best friend and his girlfriend. I remembered the car Ford made and named after the son of Henry Ford, Etzel. It was supposed to be a great new success, fabulously researched, designed, and promoted, and was in fact a marketing flop, a sort of sinking Titanic of the auto industry, which one wag said looked like an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon. I love it when the high-paid experts belly flop, showing how little they really know. Pia was inspired by a more recent and less unkind image. The starlet who married a billionaire, Pia Zadora, a cute girl but not favored by critics for her acting ability. I have considerable sympathy for folk not favored by critics. Maybe if I had another 100,000 words to play with, I could document why I regard critics as Etzel types. So the name Etzel was meant to vaguely suggest disaster, and the name Pia to suggest cuteness without much else. A lovely couple. But of course when I made them main characters for this novel, I got to know them better and learned more respect. That tends to happen when you get to really know anyone you once held in contempt, and is surely one of the fundamental lessons of life. It is ignorance that breeds prejudice. I proofread my novels, but it is my theory that errors grow on the page after the proofreading. Ask any other writer if it isn't so. But this time I caught a bad one before it escaped. I used the Dvorak keyboard, which has the vowels on the home row on the left side and the most used consonants on the home row on the right side. It's a better layout than QWERTY, but it's hard to get on a computer. My wife, who was a programmer in the Stone Age of computing, the 1960s, has to get into the works to change the key assignments, and it is a struggle, and the keys remain marked wrong. So I've learned to ignore the marks and type by touch. But I do make some errors. The O is next to the E, and, well, I discovered that when I had referred to the peephole of the gourd, that double E came out as a double O. Never mind what it spelled. I corrected it in a hurry. One of my contributors, listed below, is Natalie Tran. She gave an interesting history to one of her suggestions. Her class was on a 3-day field trip, and naturally got bored during the interstices. They had just seen many fascinating tide pool creatures. One of the supervising mothers was an actress, and she invented a game called Anemone Enemy. There was one anemone and one enemy standing before a judge. The only way they could be distinguished was that the enemy had a pencil hidden on her body. The judge had to figure out which one was the enemy. Behind the judge was the jury, who distracted the judge by singing loud and out-of-tune songs, such as Puff the Magic Dragon, twisted into a horrible racket. A judge who guessed correctly was given a set of purple anemone earrings. I wonder, doesn't a real trial sometimes seem almost as crazy? Here, at any rate, are my credits for reader-suggested notions, some of which may not have turned out the way the suggestors had in mind, and some of which did not turn out the way I expected. I hope I have not garbled any names. They are roughly in order of their appearance in the novel, except when one reader suggested several. Chatroom Consultant, Tammy Bender, also known as Dragonfly 29. Mud Consultant, Marisol Ramos. Grundy Golem speaks computer languages. Mode M, people ensnared in chat lines. Talent of becoming what is needed. Siamese triplets, Heather Ogilvy. Xanth underwater setting. I may return to this in a future novel. It's an example of not doing a notion justice. James Shaw. Brass Coast. Mike Burkholder and Aaron Batista. Prince Dahl, talent of turning the inanimate living, Sean McDonald. Xanth Theme Park, Nikki Thompson. Xanth Wave from the Future. There's another notion deserving more. Justin Virus Chang. Through the Gourd, homepage, Jessica Grider. Diabetic cured in Xanth, Kimberly Putz. Talent of seeing one-day future. To create solid illusionary creatures, Sarah Curran, Chris Mudd Robinson. Isle of View 2, Andrew Cowell. Wrestling, boxing, soccer, Vasudev Mandyam. Description of Demonica, Monica Ramirez. B-Rate, Genius with IQ Vines, Katie Green. Joystick, Sad Stick, Andrew Graft. Magic Locket, Magic Bracelets from Hinge. Super Vacuum Cleaner, Billy Banks. Cloud Shaping, Walking on Water, 6-inch Levitation, Jeremy and Cameron Gray. Making Things Sink into the Ground, Mike Ward. Conjuring Mint Plants, Making Things Slippery, Conjuring Eggs, Amplify Noise, Making Paintings Come to Life, Summoning Birds, Thickening and Thinning, Hearing Anything Close By, Chris Mudd Robinson. Talent of making a shield around oneself, Heal Other Folks' Injuries, Abby Everdell. Fracto Assuming Human Form, Jelana Conaway. Talent of Learning, Keel Van Horn. More or Less Twins, Talent of Turning into Humanoid Crossbreeds, Sean McDonald. Talent of Turning Things Transparent so that their ideas show, Jake Waters. Waxing the Moon's Green Cheese, Jessica Mansfield. Returning Things to their original state, Pedro Leon de la Barra. Pet Rock, E. coli, Salmonella, Chocolate Spiders, Barbara Hay Hummel. Bringing Statues to Life, Matthew King. Glaring Daggers, Anonymous. Controlling the Emotions or Moods of Others, Alexandra Roeder, Chris Robinson, Mike Ward. Leica, Emily Ratsep. Bowling, Sock Her Balls, Chris Swanson. Putting Wings on Anything, Chelsea Bagwell. Modifying or Deflecting Talents, Joshua T. Fesmeyer. Chinchilla, Speaking Things Real, His Story, Her Story, Antonym, Donovan Beeson. Chili Powder, Cookbook, Dorcas Bethel. No Ledge, Michael G. Till. Window Pane, Miguel Atima. Dynamite, Robert Meyerson. Time Being, Alex Gordon. Leprechauns in Xanth, Tracy Ann Romano. Rusty, Who Makes Metal Rust, Rusty Balcom. Straitjacket, Chris Swanson. Simon Says, and It Happens, Jessica Mansfield. Brandon Risner, Asphalt, Toad Lily, Jessica Sager. Raccoonessence, Tailgater, Wanda Remenerick. Scholar Ship, Terry McNamee. Lake of Pollux Oil, Jason Randall. Chestnut, Nath Aiken. Elena Human, Polly Esther, Anemone, Natalie Tran. Intermission, Fire Drake's Iron Lung, Andrew Graff. Handy Harpy, Sarah Curran. Girl Who Relates to Dragons, Heather Davis. Chanteur Centaur, with talent of mispronunciation, Bryce Weinert and Kristen Courtnage. Mundanes named after colors, Kristen Gardner. Cypress Tree, Alan Little. Earth, Water, Air Ants, Rick Radu and his brother. Alexandra, Were-Dolphin, Alexandra Roeder. Gabriel, Visiting Mundane Boy, Gabriel McDermott. Brothers Who Can Turn Self to Ice or Anything Else to Ice, Larry Hornbaker, the land of Xanth being nice female. Dana Bates. Centaur magician who knows the talents of others. Rachel Rempel. Demonica and Demon Ted growing up and marrying. Bethany Ayers. Diluted love elixir and finder spell. Carla Sussman. Roller skates. Ron Lemming. Roses levitate own colors. Jefferson Kohler. Alley Horse. Christy Weiss. To save humanity. Tom Pierce. Sarah P. Betty Schaefer. Lilac Bush. Margaret Pavlak. Ruler takes control. Pie and Ears. Michael Burkholder and Aaron Batista. Kenneth Tree. Jane Burkowski. Water Chestnut Tree. Jill Conto. Adder Does Math. Melissa Stevens. Pitchforks. Nicole Atkins. Hall Minotaurs. Joe Barter. Binoculars. Gordon Johnson. Captivity. Brainstorm. Vincent Pardo. Bed-making adult conspiracy. Tiffany Stahl. Attire. Chris Efta. Seal. Jessica Mansfield. Fireweed. Marshall Porter McConaughey. Lactose intolerant. Andrew Crawford. Crack Doctor. Anita Haviland. Dot. Scott Edwards. Changing gender at will. Richard Barnhart. Reverse Wood lives backwards. Ray Koenig. Owen Cossaboon. Sharon Kresser. Thimbleberries. Jessica Mansfield. Stingray. Billy Exton. Sir Cuss for Harpies. Nicole Taylor. Waller and Wallette building walls. Thomas L. Bruns. Air compressor. Chris Efta. Canteen. Ricky Gorin. Handbook. Illiterate. High Piers. Low Piers. Dorcas Bethel. Butter knife. David Simons. Role-playing game. Jonathan Ulrich. Human race. Michael Milestrup. Psi Centaur. Cyclone. Gary Roth. Christopher. Christopher Humphreys. Story of Gray and Robata. Aaron Schramm and daughters, Shariah and Fiona. Joystick and keyboard for computer. Spencer Lease. Cassie Centaur. Becca Steele. Murtaurs. Jason B. Rollins. Poison Ivy. Chris Mudd Robinson. Fantasy. Greg Rimco. Library Puns. Mary Lou Matthew. Pay-per-view. Rusty Balcom. Moosick Soothe. Sharon Ellis. Sycophant. Ursula Flinsbuck. Draco Dragons. Black Barrels. C.B. Hutchings. Dream Realm Monsters Loose. Tom Kuntz. Gravestone. Adam W. Ellis. Napalm Tree. Bentley Gettings. Morph. Kyle Johnson. Paperback Person. Kelly English. Carpet Tunnel Syndrome. Carla Sussman. Carpool Tunnel Thin Dome. Tim Alsop. Talent of Summoning Magic Dust. Elizabeth Pearl. Detonate. D. Lar. I bought my left-handed bow from her. I think she's related to Delight, Delectable, or Delicious, because she lives in Kiss Me. Fun Gus. Michael Kenny. Moonshine. Mark A. Godboys. Many readers inquire about Jenny Elf, who derives from Jenny Guildward, paralyzed at age 12 by a drunk driver. I haven't said much because not much has changed. At this writing, in Jamboree 1998, Jenny is 21 and remains mostly paralyzed. Drunk drivers are still given mostly wrist slaps. I still write to her every week. Jenny Elf, in Xanth, got married last novel and is now a princess, and isn't in this one because the year following marriage is nobody else's business. Presumably the stork will have one more visit. In due course. End of Xone of Contention by Piers Anthony.